Awesome, we're back again. Who wants to start this time?
I'm happy to.
Awesome, go for it.
Okay, so did a lot of thinking about kind of the existing stuff we've done, and also how previously, or in our last sprint, the kind of the subject of historic kind of modifications or historic choices came up, and I was trying to kind of strip things back and look at the kind of this kind of loop of maybe making multiple choices, interpolating from those choices, and then being presented with a new set of options, which you can either then select a single view or further interpolate those choices. So I was seeing it very simply as a kind of an initial set being generated, initial set of layouts being generated, from which you can choose between, say, 1 and 4 as an initial set. And depending on whether you choose a single layout or you choose multiple layouts, you then get some extra contextual choices. So if it's more than one and up to the maximum, you can then refine. Well, I've said refine, but it really means generate new layouts. So you get a new set of, say, 12 layouts within the scope of the hidden parameters, as they may be. And you kind of can continue this cycle until you finally get to the point where you're happy with a single layout from this kind of continuous cycle of interpolation and generation, which you can then exit the loop. But you can also scroll back at any point in this kind of choice-making decision to modify your existing choices, which takes you back in the kind of history of interpolation to kind of I guess modify your timeline of design choices. So they're always visible, but the interface would simply be a kind of scrolling, kind of endless scroll situation until you hit your kind of single happy point. So no mention of axes or parameters, or you're just being presented with a set of visual choices which determine your kind of future outputs effectively.
Cool. Any questions? Seems super clear to me, so I don't have any.
Cool.
Who wants to go next?
How do you show the expansion between them? So, for example, when you choose, if you choose 4 variations, right? Do you generate the space? So the space with the new selection could be as big as the initial space, right?
Yeah, so I was thinking of it in kind of sets. So if we kind of define a certain number that would be generated. So there's this kind of like a block basically of X number of generated layouts, which you then continually refine and which you just load in sequence beneath. So you have this kind of visual timeline of the choices you've made. So it continually kind of shows your previous choices, and then shows a new set of layouts, maybe in a block of some form. And modifying a previous block will then send you on a kind of new path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Then maybe I should be next, because my variation was quite similar to Sam's. So basically, starting from the one in the left, same deal. You have you have the generated space initially. You pick and choose a couple of them. Just a second, so I can. Right. Okay. So you pick and choose, right? And the way you kind of visualize this filtering of the space, I was thinking it can be done in a couple of ways, actually, right? So something similar to what Google did with their own project, in which you kind of show the ones you kind of selected and the compressed space in between them, right? Because there's something more there. And the new underneath, there's the new space, which is connected, closely tied to the ones you've chosen. That brings up the problem of expanding the old space and switching back to the old to the initial space, right? So when you kind of expand one, what do? You show a split view. So if you want to refine, so for example, you see the new space, it's not exactly what you want. You want to go back and refine your initial picking, let's say. And do you show split space? That could be potentially visually weird. The other option would be to kind of draw. Basically, you still click and choose, but with each click, it kind of maps out a shape, right? And that space you're viewing, and you can think of it as something like an incomplete polygon, right? You can complete a polygon, you can make it as complex as you want, and whatever. That gets remapped to the new space, right? Which you can zoom into that space, right? And filter until you get to the layout view. That's a little bit that brought up the idea that I think this is complementary to my initial idea, where you kind of zoom out from the initial, where you drag in to get that generative space. You drop in a couple of things, you zoom out so you understand how it works. This is quite the reversal, right? So when you want to manipulate the space, you zoom back in and you zoom back in and so forth. I think they're both complementary, but we could potentially start with this one. Right. The third option would be to kind of have your choice displayed as a group, for example, which acts as a filter on the actual space, right? So it can be an overlay. It shows you what you've chosen on top, and then you have the new space here. You choose again, and then it kind of overlays the new filter and so forth. It can go on forever. But then that raises the question, if you kind of have these kind of groupings, then you could potentially have symbols in here as well that act as filters on that space, right? So this could be your working bar, your operational bar, right? And if you kind of go into the document view, that's and tweak some parameters there at that level of control, that kind of gets displayed as a new filter, which is the document, and so forth, right? You kind of flip between these things constantly, and you kind of have this new formula for getting to what you want, right? You have an arrow of the space, you have a symbol, you have some fine level parameter control, and then you have another space exploration and so forth, right? That could be a new formula. And you can save that formula, you can do a lot of stuff with that formula. So these are my three options. And that's it.
Cool. So you just see them kind of loading in effectively on top of each other. So like one set replacing the next set, replacing the next set in this kind of third view.
More like zooming, right? Not necessarily replacing, but zooming. So you kind of have this understanding that once you clicked on a few things, you filtered it could be nice to have an animation, right? It zooms in and then it expands into a new space, right? So you understand visually, and with a little bit of motion, you can understand what happens there, right?
And clicking on one of the symbols or groups takes you back to that
Yeah.
or zooms you back out to that view.
Exactly. Yep.
Any more questions about this one? Okay, who's next? Stefan?
Sure. So my idea. So I was trying to answer one of the questions two of the questions that we talked about earlier, and I think the approach is at the beginning of what both Sam and Soren presented. My question is, how do we teach this vocabulary to the user? How do we show what a property means? And so the idea that I have, this is not a UI. It's just on the left, the user is able to input some assets and relationship between the assets, saying, for instance, that the title should be before the copy, or that there is an asset and that it should be strong, and there can be a slider to define the level of strength for this element. And this is the basic stuff, the stuff that is just, okay, I want to define the basic relationship between the assets. And when you launch the generation of layouts, you obtain a multitude of layouts that follow these constraints. That have these backgrounds, that have the contrast between the backgrounds and the text, that kind of stuff. Then it's the issue of what do you mean when you select stuff? When you select multiple objects, what do you mean? What kind of dimension do you want to explore? Instead of making it implicit, I want to make it explicit, because if it's not explicit, there might be some frustration if the system doesn't seem to understand what you mean. So what I do is you select one or several of the outputs that you like, and the system shows you what other properties exist in the layout that you have selected. So, for instance, what has been grouped together, or if the image has been put on the left, there is a property for that. Or if some background has been associated with a group, there is a property for that. Or the text has been centered, there is a property for that. And from there, you can do pretty much what Soren showed in his third example. You can lock a property and say, okay, I want to explore this subspace. For instance, I want to keep the text centered. I like that. Or you can tweak, maybe left border as a field, and you can change it. Or you can reject the property, saying, okay, I'm interested in what you're doing, but I don't want my text to be on color background. And so this is a way of going to the next step. But since it's not about UI, this could be a list of things. This could be a graph like this. This could be whatever we want. I think it's compatible with the stuff that both Sam and Sarina have shown, because it both could be a way of explaining both explorations of these spaces. That's it for me. Any question?
So the kind of parametric modification in this sense would be based on like a group or individual elements or both, or
whatever a property can qualify.
okay, cool. Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, Gloria?
So I kind of thought about it in terms of looking at like the initial import of assets and kind of putting them into groups or like populations. So it might be that the designer has kind of dumped a bunch of stuff into different buckets initially. So it might be like some stuff might be like mood board, some things might be like content, some things might be like a color palette. So kind of exist in sort of buckets for people to like work with initially. And then kind of along the top, I thought about like the work, kind of how somebody might work with symbols and like what happens if there's like a tension with thinking about it in terms of like a filtering thing. And also like a space for like, I think the things that at that level they have to deal with are sort of like a library of like the brand guidelines. So that's captured. And then I think working with the symbols in kind of the original way, I think having some level of control over like how many variants you want to see. So it's not necessarily going into an infinite space, just going by some of the designers saying that they wouldn't necessarily want to work with more than 25 in one go. But to be able to change the number that they see as they as to the level of like granular change that they want to experience within the parameters that they've selected. And then I think, yeah, being able to kind of like capture the different things onto something that kind of assists like what they're doing in sort of a workspace or a play space. So if they've kind of decided that they want to work with 3 things, they're able to kind of manipulate, to sort of like further manipulate it on a symbol level, or if they move on to the next one, it's starting to kind of introduce more like granular controls, and also to see a sort of a history of decisions that have been made on one layout, or they've decided to actually apply those decisions to 3 layouts. And then also like a kind of a data view of like what the particular layout that they're working on. So if they want to kind of expose what's happening on a deeper level, there's a kind of conceal reveal component to it. Yeah, that's it.
Do you see that that kind of last one as a bit like, say, like the history panel or something in Photoshop? Like, how do you see that kind of
Yeah, pretty much.
the history of actions working like that? Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. So like if I've been working on it up to a certain level, there's maybe like a set of actions that I might want to repeat on the layouts that I've shortlisted, and I should be able to apply that to all 3 of them. I should be able to apply that to like one of them. If there's like a very tiny degree of like change between the actual layouts that you've shortlisted, then I think that it becomes more, it becomes something that you can then create as an additional symbol for yourself, but it's actually just a shortcut. So it's kind of like you get deeper and deeper into editing or like recording the actions that you've done. So you're actually kind of like encouraging the user to head more into working with symbols over time. Yeah, so that's kind of as far as I've gotten. But in terms of like navigating the sort of the generative space, I kind of acted more on somebody be able to set the parameters from the outset as to the number of variants that they want to see, but also having the option to kind of, yeah, to navigate kind of like horizontally or vertically to kind of see if there's, yeah, to kind of use it as like an ideating or like exploration tool, really. So it's like, if you really know what the target, I mean, it's kind of like, if you know what your target is, then you can say, I only want to see like 5 variants along this one property. But if you're looking for inspiration, then you might want to just scroll infinitely into whenever. So it's kind of 2 set points. Yeah. Like, do I want to achieve this particular goal that I have in my mind, or do I want to explore and let the system inspire me?
Okay, any more questions? Yeah, I'll do my final one. Yeah. Yeah, so mine is based on a best of ideas from previous sprints that I liked, combining all of these things together, or trying to. And unfortunately, I came up with more questions than answers, but the basic idea is that it's like a game board that you play with, and you can drag things in, and the agent can drag things in, and the boards will respond accordingly. So when you drag things into the top left corner, these can be either by dragging a property saying, I like something with high contrast, or you drag multiple properties in, high contrast and symmetry. And it will sort of fill that part of the board. And then the agent will either, I don't know if it's automatic or if it's when you click on stuff, that it will also act in the bottom right side. And then in between, we have lots of blends. So the same idea of blending between what you're doing, what the agent's doing. Could be on a 3x3 scale or 5x5. I think there might be more space. It depends how interesting it is. And on the top right corner, we have something that's more about exploration and using the AI to try and guide you into places where you could be going, and the blend of what you selected between the more exploration type and the blend of what the agents picked and what is this exploration space, but also on the bottom left, something that's closer to what you've done in your history. That's why it's sort of nearby the history or the favorites. Whichever things you favorited will sort of on average say that this is the kind of stuff you've liked, and here's a blend of the kind of stuff you've liked with the kind of stuff you've actively selected. So for each one of these cells, you can swipe them in and out, and when that happens, it goes either to your favorite, or it sort of changes the what you liked cell, and new ones come in that are variations of that. That's because there's many ways to blend between these things, and so there may be different options that come up when you sort of say you don't like them anymore. So as you play around tactilely with the grid, it sort of changes with you. On the bottom right, there are different types of agents, one which may be more random, suggesting things for you, another which is more data science. You could have lots of different personas. So it ties into what we talked about these personas embodying what the AI does. Yeah, so there's lots of questions about, do you only have impact on certain cells in the grid, or can you control them all, or what's the default starting set, and when does the agent act, and when does the board change? And so lots of open questions that I have no answers for yet. But at least the concept is there. So with that said, I'll put it up to questions.
Not so much a question, but a comment. I think it's very cool because it's something that I do remember from the previous sprint, but that I didn't think of including in my design. It's the idea that when Gloria was talking about the infinite scrolling, or Soren was talking about the space being defined by how you walk it, I think that's what is missing, is some kind of dimension provided by the system, not just randomness. So if we had columns, for instance, and you could pick columns that are attributed to agents, like a random one, or one that is that tries to increase contrast because you've given it a property, or one that tries to follow some rules. It would be very interesting because you could have your design and show how it compares to some other design suggested by an agent. And also, if you had the interpolation that we've been talking about, you could have the full space, but it would not be totally random. You would have some control about what's at the outer layer of the space. So I find it quite interesting.
I would see myself trying to beat the agent, right? Like
I think that's fun. I think that could be cool as well, because I mean, your goal is to produce something that is ultimately better than the machine on its own, but just by the virtue of competing, you're collaborating, which is an interesting twist. So you can always win, but the agent doesn't get pissed off.
Like the ghost car in a racing game or something, where it's like
Yeah.
zooming around ahead of you. But yeah,
I
when
think
you
in competitive, in competitive chess, I think this is it's called Centaur, something like that. Are you guys familiar with that?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll look it up. Yeah, Centaur chess. Just a second. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I'll share the link.
I was going to say that I think we should have little dots each. I'm going to make some dots, and then we can put 2 dots on average on other people's designs. So you can put 3 dots or 4 dots on the really designs you like, but localized dots, so on the specific bits that you like about that design. So we can have some kind of takeaway. So whenever we resume the sprint, we have some sense of what people liked. So I'm going to make those dots now. Try and put them. Where should I put them? It's a little fat. Okay, I have enough dots. I'm going to put some names beside each so you don't steal each other's dots, because that happened before.
buying the votes, stealing the votes.
You just put your name next to your whatever line you take on, and faster. Get there eventually.
Thanks. I was just about to jump in.
Shouldn't that be anonymous horse?
Touche, my dear friend. Touche.
Awesome. Okay, let's go and do some dot voting. Don't vote for your own design, just use the dots on everybody else's. Okay, I'm going to hide my screen because people don't like seeing me vote.
Can we put several dots on the same thing?
If you have nothing else to use your dots for, I guess so. Okay, looks like we're all done, so I'm just going to quickly go over it and summarize it, and if there are any comments or things I missed. So in my design, there's a bunch of likes on the left bar, but nothing particularly that stands out. They're just generally nicely distributed votes. Most important, people like the agents. Bit of explanation, being able to drag stuff into the board. Anything I missed from that design? Good. So in Sam's design, there's lots of votes for scrolling. So if you scroll back, you can see previous history, and you modify it. It also interpolates, being able to select one of 4 layouts, which is kind of both tied together. So things are light. Stefan's design, the ability to select properties and their values or strengths in this case, or floating point numbers. A lot of votes for automatically generating groups or displaying. I don't know what these votes are for, actually. Could someone clarify what they voted for? If they voted for the automatic generation part or the grouping part?
Mine was for the grouping, the automatically kind of generated grouping.
Yeah, mine too.
Okay. And there's 2 votes as well for locking things and tweaking, rejecting things that the system has chosen for you. And we have Gloria's design. I put some votes here, which is about this idea of separating these different buckets, different things that you can have impact over, which I like, and I would like to put in my design as well. It's a good idea of being able to say, now I just want to explore this generative space for structure, and somehow I think, or for color schemes, or for whatever it is. So narrowing down the generative space, and I think this idea of buckets sort of makes a nice, elegant way to click on this and see how. I mean, it's not what she has in her design, but I like it. Then there's a vote here for the tree. I think it must be a Photoshop style history view. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Okay, a vote as well. This Soren's. The compacted space has a couple of votes, and it's incomplete polygon, and then mapping that back onto a full polygon, that's got 1 vote each. This is showing old space, new space, and the divide between the 2 has got 1 vote. And a bunch of votes for this sort of stack of operations that you're applying that you can then browse up and down, I guess, to jump around in the navigation view. I got 4 votes as well. And I'm missing one. Is that it? That's it. Cool. Question is next time how we can unify all of this. If we can.
There are some nice ideas that can be unified. I think the whole idea of playing with properties and showing them in some kind of list, but that we can operate on. I like it very much. I would like to explore the idea of buckets too, because I like the idea. I'm not sure what it means.
I think they're similar to the upload page that we talked about earlier. So when you upload something, it kind of becomes part of a bucket, or maybe it's the word groups, but we'll see.
Well, I was kind of thinking, so in my idea where you kind of have these filters, the kind of stack up, right? That you build something, you can save that configuration, and you can save it into something like a bucket, right? That kind of has a specific purpose. Right, so for example, getting something, doing the brand guidelines for this brand, you would take a set of steps that kind of gets you there. For the other brand, would be a different steps that you can save as 2 different actions, buckets, whatever, right?
Like a profile almost.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole thing is it kind of mixes with the history as well, right? You kind of have this this trace of where you've been into the whole space and what actions you've applied, and then you can save them at the end, right? The only difference from me and Gloria was that I was kind of seeing this at the end and saving it somewhere a little bit more low profile rather than having it upfront. And especially at the beginning of the whole experience, right? Because it's something that it's quite a big learning curve getting to custom actions, right? Even if you call them buckets, right? But it's still at the end, right?
Okay, awesome. The kids are here, so that means my quiet time is over. So I suggest you keep all these ideas in the back of your heads, and if you have any other further ideas, write them down, scribble them down. We'll continue this after the retreat, or even if we're talking about in the evenings at the retreat, could fit as well. Cool.
I wonder
Thanks so much.
I wonder if there's some value to maybe instead of trying to like narrow it down to one route, building loads of prototypes just as clickable individual things, and then we can shove those back in front of the users and just see how they react.
It's a great idea, especially when Olaf is available to join. We can make teams of 2 and just pair up on which designs we feel are the most exciting and work together on that. Yeah, that's an awesome idea. Cool. Well, have a great evening, and
see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye.